on the line. Does God want you to call us? With your host Shannon Q and featured guest Paulogia. Welcome to the line.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the line. Super exciting tonight. We have the world's most handsome man here this evening. It is Paul from Paulogia. Hi, Paul.
I am the most handsome man here this evening. That's right.
And before we get into calls, I want you to have an opportunity to tell everybody who you are and where they can find you. The links are in the description. No matter where you're watching, we're streaming to 3 channels tonight. Just want to let everybody know, especially people watching my channel, if you send a super chat, they are very much appreciated. They help to support the show, but we are not able, due to the type of platform, to read them on air. So yeah, and if you're watching on my channel, what are you doing? Subscribe to the line. Subscribe to the line. The link's in the description. I'm not always the host of this show. Paul's not always the co-host of this show. If you want to see this type of content, you've got to go subscribe to the Line channel. So yeah, Paul, without further ado, housekeeping done. Tell everybody who you are and where they can find you.
Sure. My name is Paul. I go by, my YouTube channel's name is Paulogia, so sometimes I go by Paulogia, which is just fine. And I was very excited that, I love being on this show because people know how to pronounce my name, and that's very exciting. But yeah, so my YouTube channel is just search for Paulogia, and I'm also on Twitter and other places. But yeah, I'm a former Christian, and on my channel, I tend to look at counter-apologetics, the claims of Christians, be they young earth type claims or theological claims or Bible history claims, all the above, since that used to be my life. Yeah.
So I'm really hoping there's some callers in there that are going to ask either Bible questions or YEC related questions. I'm very much looking forward to it. We already have callers in the queue, so I'm not going to wait that much longer. If you're watching on the other channels and aren't familiar with me, hi, I'm Shannon Q. Nice to meet you. I also have a channel. It's called Shannon Q. It's awful. I wouldn't subscribe to it. I'm garbage. I'm horrible at YouTube. All right. So first we are going to start with Andrew, and Andrew is a theist, and Andrew has a question about who wrote the Gospel of Mark. So, Andrew, you are on the line. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you, buddy. So, what's your question?
I don't know. Is there a topic tonight or what?
The topic is, did God tell you to call us?
The Bible's always a good topic.
Always.
Oh, well, let's do it. Let's talk about the Bible. What are your questions or assertions about the Bible for Paul and I this evening, Andrew?
What convinced Paul that the Bible was not true, I guess?
Oh, well.
Ooh.
Or you, Shannon? Were you? I don't know your story, Shannon. But were you a former Christian?
Yes, I was. I was an Anglican, and our answers are actually dramatically different to that question, oddly enough, but they both pertain to the Bible. So, Paul, why don't you go? Go ahead.
Sure. So, for me, part of what unraveled the Bible was, as some of you know, when looking into young earth creationist claims. So, my first video was kind of tongue-in-cheek called "Ken Ham Made Me an Atheist." Ken Ham just convinced me that young earth creation position wasn't tenable, and since I held that position, because I felt so foolish about having held that position for such a long time, and not so much foolish, but having taken on authority that the answer was correct, I couldn't, at that point in my life, let me take anything based on authority, be it my views on the Bible or God or even political views. And almost everything in my life, I'm like, well, what have I been taking on authority? So I set out to research the Bible again. Some of the things that were troubling to me were that both Jesus and the Apostle Paul both spoke of Adam and Eve and Noah as if they were historical figures, which is a bit problematic given some new things that I learned about evolution and how humans came to be. So that was one of the things that sparked it. And then I started digging into, where did we get this document from? And it turns out we don't know who wrote the Gospels. Paul wrote maybe 7 of the letters that are attributed, the 13 that are attributed to him, but the rest are forgeries. We don't really know who wrote any other New Testament books. most of the original Old Testament books are clearly compiled by anonymous people, that a lot of the books that are supposedly written early look like they were probably written late, which means they were written after some of the prophecies that I had originally held that they fulfilled. There's just piece of information after that, like that were basically, for me, along the lines of, this Bible is a human document. And as a human document only, then the broad claims need to be substantiated from other places. And when I went to look for extra biblical corroboration of a lot of these things, they just simply weren't there. So I'm trying to keep it to 90 seconds. That's sort of the short version. Does that lead you towards any follow-up questions, or should we go to Shannon?
Yeah, that's fine. So it's the age of the earth and evolution. And then you checked out the historicity of the New Testament, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. So the age of the earth was the thing that made me reject authority as a good enough reason to accept things, which for most of my life, authority was good enough. So that was kind of the first domino.
So does that lead you
I think Mark wrote Mark. Do you want to share your...
Why? What? I mean, I can, but that's less interesting to me, is why you think Mark wrote Mark. So aside from the fact that it has the name Mark written on it, what evidence do you have that Mark wrote Mark? Because most biblical scholars, Christian or otherwise, would say, we have no idea who wrote the first gospel.
Well, I would ask just Paulogia one question. Do you think the New Testament was written by one author?
No.
All of the 27 books of the New Testament.
No, but they clearly had some of them seem to have had multiple authors, amongst themselves, even the individual books. So certainly no, there were probably 16 plus authors involved.
Mm-hmm. How does that pertain to the author of Mark?
Because we focus so much on the Gospels that there's other books of the New Testament that Mark is mentioned in, like 1 Peter 5:13, where Peter says, "Mark, my son."
Yes, and there's a character named Mark. I'm not in meaning to imply historicity or not, but there's a character named Mark that you were saying that Peter thought of as a son. Well, how does that have to relate to the authorship of a different book?
Because we should really, because I've only been a Christian for 4 to 5 years, so I'm learning how to. First of all, I got to learn all these 66 books, which is hard enough. But
right.
So, in the book of Acts, which is the history, you would agree that it's about 30 years of history in the book of Acts, right?
When you
but
say
the book itself spans 30 years? Is that what you're saying? Like the narrative within the book spans about 30 years?
Yes, the events described are meant to cover from around 33 AD, from like a few weeks after Jesus died, to the early 60s. That's the alleged events covered. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we could see problems with the Apostle Paul and Mark in Acts chapter 15. They had a disagreement. So we could see how the early church, there wasn't a perfect doctrine of Christianity, I would say.
But Paul never met Mark.
Well, we don't know. Yeah, certainly it's not written down. But I'm also curious as to, the fact that, like, let's say Mark had all kinds of grand adventures that aren't in the book. Like, nowhere in the Bible does it say that someone named Mark wrote the first gospel. So we could know all about a dude named Mark. And I guess for me, it makes more sense that as we were if you look through your Bible history, it gets to be around the 180 AD when suddenly people want to decide which books are part of the Bible and which books aren't. And so the 4 Gospels that unfortunately at the time, didn't have labels. They didn't have things. So the early church that wanted to use those 4 books had to find someone to ascribe it to. So it makes sense in the case of Luke and Mark to find characters who existed in the Pauline letters or other traditions and say, well, why not make it Mark? Or why not make it Luke? I don't know how what you're putting forward, that there happens to be a character named Mark who is never described as having written a book, should give me confidence that Mark was the author of Mark.
Yeah. You explained that a little better than I would have.
But
I would echo what Paul just said.
Oh, go ahead, Shane.
I was just saying that I would echo what Paul just said. He maybe described that a little bit better. You're saying, I know that the Gospel of Mark was written by Mark because later on in the Bible, in Acts, which was written after Jesus' death, there's reference to a character named Mark. So the name Mark comes up and is referenced as one of Jesus' apostles. Thus, like, how do I get from there to recognizing that Mark is acknowledged as existing to Mark, in fact, wrote this gospel? Where do you draw that connection?
Mark I would consider Mark a partial eyewitness, because in Mark 14:51 through 52, he describes himself as a young boy, and it says, and a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him. But he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. So Mark puts himself. This is only in the Gospel of Mark. It's not in the other.
I'm sorry to laugh there. You made me think of a movie that Shannon and I saw.
That's Assassin's 33 AD.
I'm sorry. I did not. I just want to say I'm not laughing at all at you, Andrew. You remind me of using anecdote from.
And
yeah,
even that
I
character
understand.
Like,
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, even that character likely wouldn't have been Mark, though, because Mark was one of the apostles at the time, and that was during Jesus, just before he wasn't.
Well, Mark is said to, never by himself, but Mark is said to have been a disciple of Peter.
Oh, interesting. Okay, fair enough. There you go. So, and it's still not getting me there. So you're giving me a reference to somebody that was written about in Mark, not even in first person, and then attributing that character to Mark, and I'm still not getting there. Like, there's no historical evidence that anybody has any idea who wrote the Gospel of Mark, and you're not providing me any evidence right now, aside from saying a character named Mark was referenced later on in the Bible in Acts, and also there's some first person perspective without a name even given to a character that I think might have been Mark in Mark. That still doesn't get me to, I know that Mark penned Mark.
But
you see why?
I guess, Shannon, if you understand where I'm coming from, Mark wants to share Jesus. It's not about him, if that makes sense.
Well, him wanting to share Jesus, like, that, I can even grant you that, but granting you that doesn't get me to Mark wrote Mark.
Right. What I'm hearing you say, Andrew, is the author of Mark had a theological point. And I don't think anyone would dispute you. Yeah. The author of Mark had theological points to make. What we're hearing you saying is, though, that you know who that author is. And, of course, I think you would understand that there were, at the time, hundreds or thousands of people who wanted to advocate the message for Jesus. So I'm still, just saying that the gospel author wanted to put forth Christianity, then that just narrows him down to Christians.
Right. So you still haven't put forth anything that would lead me to believe that Mark wrote Mark. And these are some of the problems that atheists like me and Paul have. Like, when we enter into these discussions, a lot of the times they're just assertions that aren't based on anything really, really tangible. They're just kind of based on like a feeling or an intuition, and they're presented to us as though, how silly of you not to share my intuition about this, when really I can't share your intuition. But what I can get on board with is if you present to me, well, they found this piece of parchment that was signed by Mark and shared the verbatim the writing style from some of the pieces of parchments that were utilized to compile the Gospel of Mark, which we don't even have at this point. like if you showed me something tangible that was, referential in, reality, then I could get there. But you're essentially saying a book that I don't personally believe in, that was written admittedly by you for theological purposes by a multitude of authors, that has, some issues in between the books themselves. Like if you look at Matthew's like 80% Mark, and what it isn't is clearly changed for theological purposes. It's not going to get me there. But if you say, okay, well, that there's evidence of Mark was a student of Peter, and we have evidence of that outside of the Bible and inside of the Bible, and we can look and see where Mark had signed documents that were in his writing style, in his handwriting, and followed his specific cadence, and those match the parchments that we have. Then I'd be like, okay, yeah, sure. So Mark wrote Mark. But right now, all I have to go on is, Shannon, you have to understand that this guy wanted to share Jesus, and also Mark's referenced later, and some of it was talked about in the first person, and the Mark is on the title. So obviously Mark wrote it. I have an intuition about that. Can you see where I might deviate from that perspective, given that I don't start with the presupposition that I believe the book itself is even true?
I understand your point, but take something simple like in Acts chapter 18, where Luke, who wrote Acts, I don't know if you think that or not.
I don't.
But he records that the Roman Emperor Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome. Mm-hmm. And that's corroborated outside the Bible by Suetonius and Cassius Dio.
Okay, but you just quoted a book.
Really, what?
You just quoted a book that you don't think was written by Mark. Are we getting to how that's connected to Mark?
What was the question?
You just quoted a passage from a book that you don't think was written by Mark, that didn't reference the book of Mark, nor anyone. So, are you driving towards a point on the authorship of Mark?
My point is that Mark and Luke both knew each other.
Okay, but
even if there
was a historical Mark and a historical Luke that knew each other. Okay, great.
What was the question?
There was a historical Mark and a historical Luke, and they were best buddies, and they hung out, and they, they broke bread in each other's homes. Great. How does that relate to that either one wrote a book in the Bible?
Is your problem that, I guess, let's take the book of Hebrews. We think Paul might have wrote that, but it doesn't. We really don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews.
Very few people think that Paul wrote it.
Would that prove the Bible is not true? If you didn't know who the author was, I think that's the point both of you are trying to make.
No.
I'm not.
That's not the point.
Not at all. I don't.
It's authorship being in question isn't the problem for either of us, but you're attempting to assert that you know the authorship, and that should increase our confidence in the book. So I have a multitude of other problems, as does Paul. Sorry to interrupt you there, Paul.
Do it.
But I have a multitude of other problems aside from the authorship. The authorship is during my deconversion, the authorship of the Bible wasn't even of a primary concern to me, nor secondary concern. I had issues separate to that. Now, I think what you're trying to angle at is, maybe one of the reasons that we're atheists is because we don't know the actual names of the people who wrote it, because it's anonymous. So you're saying, well, there is some evidence that I have an intuition about that says that we do know some of the authors. And I would even we know that Paul was an author for a pretty substantial portion of the New Testament. And I'll grant you that, and I'll say that there's historical evidence for that. But that doesn't change the issues that I have with the Bible. And you saying, well, I know Mark wrote Mark, isn't going to increase that confidence level for me. And on the contrary, it's actually going to kind of make it seem as though you're falsely inflating the amount of evidence in order to present it as more viable as an intellectual construct, when in fact it isn't. And that that seems almost like kind of you're not really addressing the point of my deconversion. You're maybe misunderstanding either of our deconversions, and you're not even in line with scholarship.
I've read a little about Ehrman, and
no, but there are many Christian scholars you can.
Go ahead.
There are many Christian scholars. In fact, I don't know that you could find a single Christian scholar, a New Testament scholar of any belief that would say that Paul wrote Hebrews, for example. Like, that's just off the table for even when I went to Bible school, no one tried to say that. I lost my train of thought there for a second. But go ahead. Sorry, what were we gonna add there?
Yeah, you go ahead. And we're gonna have to move on to another call stream. This is fascinating. I love hearing Paul talk. I love talking about the Bible. But yeah, sorry. I'll let you make one last point. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Go ahead, Andrew, and then we are gonna have to move on. I appreciate the call.
Well, the thing about the Bible is, not only can you harmonize the Gospels, but you could try to harmonize both Peter's epistles with Paul's letters. And remember, in the Jerusalem, I think it's called where Paul and Peter, Peter wanted to keep the circumcision.
The Bethlehem Accord?
He still couldn't get over the fact that a new Christianity was a new religion. And Paul corrects him in Galatians, so they had a big argument. Mm-hmm. And in his final words, in I believe it's second epistle of Peter, chapter 3, he accepts Paul's words as scripture, and that's pretty amazing to me. But I know I didn't make a good point, but it was a fascinating conversation.
You won't be surprised to learn that. You won't be surprised to learn I don't think that Peter wrote First or Second Peter, so it's all Anyway, thank you for the call. That was great. I would just say, I guess in general,
all right, thank you very much.
Because possible harmonization can happen on various things. Like, you could attempt to harmonize various versions of the Lord of the Rings books and movies where they clearly come to each other. You can come up with their theories. Like, if you want to harmonize things, you can. The question in general for us was, is the Bible true? And who the names of the Gospels were is unrelated to its truth value. But we were just curious because you had such
it's one component. Right, it's one component. Like, you identifying the authorship of something in any sort of like solidified way doesn't, like, that's one step. Then I could write a book right now. I could write it in front of you, and every word of it could be a lie. Now, you being able to say that I wrote the book of Shannon doesn't mean that anything in the book of Shannon is in any way accurate. Now, if I didn't put my name on it and I threw it in a pile and it got found 50 years from now and people started to build a worldview around the nonsense that I wrote down, and you'll never be able to attribute it to me, that doesn't make it any more or less true. Now, you being able to find the author tells you something about the author, tells you something about their motivations, it tells you something, you can put them at a place in time. Like, those are all little bits of evidence that you could have that may increase your confidence that what the author wrote down might have some ring of accuracy, but that's just one piece of it. So when somebody says with confidence, like, I know that so-and-so wrote, like Mark wrote Mark, to me, it just seems like a really overconfident statement that even Christian scholars kind of wouldn't line up with.
Right,
I don't think.
I can't think of any New Testament historian that would say that they are 100% sure of even what they're called the undisputed Pauline letters. They probably put those at like a 90% certainty. So,
right.
Yeah.
And
anyway,
so we're going to take another call.
Do it.
So the next call is going to be Daniel, and we have a busy queue today. My goodness, people really want to talk to us today. So this is Daniel from California. Daniel is a theist, and Daniel wants to ask, how do you know if God isn't true if you can't properly define God? Now, hi, Daniel. Thank you for calling the line. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Hi, that's
Hello,
that's
Daniel.
an interesting question. I'm going to get you to actually pose that question yourself because I'm not sure I understand it in the way that it was written in the queue. So if you wouldn't mind just, quickly and succinctly summarizing what your question is to Paul and I, that would be great.
From my understanding, this philosophy the Bible teaches is different than most teach. Specifically, it says to be a non-denominational Christian, pantheist, modalist, universalist, who believes in a form of actualism. I'm sure there's a couple more I could put on there. So,
Okay.
it seems to me that I would define God as, or the Bible defines God as a conscious existence, based on him saying "I am" to Moses, and then
Okay.
other things in the Bible like God is truth, he is love, all knowledge comes from God. So in that sense, everybody believes in God. We just want to recognize this person.
Paul, are you hearing Daniel okay? Because I'm not.
It's very, very low. I was wondering if it was just might be me. If Daniel, perhaps if you can get
No, it's
closer to
me.
your microphone.
Yeah. It's very
Yeah, I
difficult
can
to
move
make
it a
out what
little
you're saying.
closer. Is that better?
That is a
That's
little bit
better.
better. Yeah, it sounded like you were like across the room underwater. So if you don't mind just
It's
kind
just
of
an old
repeating that for
microphone,
me.
yeah.
Oh yeah, if you don't mind repeating some of the last of that again for me, that would be amazing. Please, thank you.
Oh, yeah, just that my understanding, the Bible seems to describe God as a conscious existence based off God saying, "I am" to Moses.
Okay.
So that way we all believe in God. We just don't recognize this person, and since mankind doesn't have a consensus on what consciousness is, it's kind of hard to prove that aspect of God.
Sure.
That's what, that's
Right.
why we have things like intelligence design.
Yes. So
So are you saying that God is all consciousness, or God happens to be a consciousness?
yeah.
I was saying God is existence. Existence itself, reality. And that
So
reality
So-
is conscious.
existence is synonymous with God to you?
Yeah. From
Gotcha.
God saying, "I am" to Moses. And what is but reality?
But you're not saying so you're saying existence is synonymous with the Christian God. So does that are you attributing any other properties to God then outside of existence? Because when people do things like say, well, God is existence, or God is consciousness, or God is experience, or God is the universe, I all I can say is, okay, fine, sure, whatever. Because then you're just defining God into existence. You're just saying this is a thing, God is the thing, and then the terms just become interchangeable, and I'm kind of whatever about that. But when you talk specifically about Christianity, then God has myriad other attributes that you're going to have to attribute to him. So you can't just say, in my mind, God is existence, and also this God that is existence is the Christian God, because then it comes with some baggage, right? There's lots of other things existence has to have packed into it in order for it to be God at that point. So how do you reconcile those things?
What else exactly?
What else exactly? Okay, so omniscience, it would need to want a relationship with you. It would need to have created a physical embodiment of itself to sacrifice so that it could determine that to forgive people for things. So it would need to be able to make choices and judgments regarding its creation. It would have to be broken into 3 different forms. It would I could go on.
Do you agree with all of those things,
Well,
Daniel?
here, I'm a modelist, so when the Bible's talking about the Trinity of God, it's talking about the Trinity itself, the same clear-made image of God. So we have our mind, we have our body, and the combination of the two resulting in what is man and what is us. So God has that same Trinity itself. He has the mind, we call that Father, the body of God, the Spirit, Holy Spirit, and the culmination of the two resulting in Jesus. Most people, don't realize God isn't a human being; He created.
But so God is more than just being synonymous with existence, because I think Shannon and I both agree that things exist. And so you've now said that God isn't just existence.
It's an aware.
Okay. So, because I accept that conscious things exist doesn't entail that I necessarily agree that there is a consciousness called God.
Right.
Yeah, but that's what I was saying. That's why until, people come to an agreement on how to prove consciousness, we won't be able to do it on that level. So,
I think I get what you're angling at. You're saying that because there's a hard problem, like a neural binding problem, like there's a problem with us being able to explain the mechanism by which consciousness emerges. You're saying, well, that mechanism is in fact God. God is consciousness. He's a conscious agent. He's existence and simultaneously consciousness. And because we can't currently explain consciousness, we can't refute God because you're saying God is consciousness. So it would come with all the properties that we get. Is that kind of what you're...
He is consciousness. Sorry, I wasn't trying to say he's consciousness. Just that existence is conscious.
So are you saying we can't refute the existence of God because we don't fully understand by what mechanisms consciousness emerges?
It seems that a lot of people have misunderstandings of the Bible. There is no English translation. You could pretty much call most Bibles pseudo Bibles, and a lot of people have end up with a lot of problems when they try to read it because of how it's written. And Paul said that he had a problem with the age of the earth, and I'm sure that has something to do with the 6 days in Genesis. They're not meant to be 6 days. That's just one problem people have.
Oh, I understand.
That still doesn't get me to consciousness.
Go that way, but I would just like. So, one of the things that seems inherent in your overall question is, or the idea that perhaps Shannon and I are attempting in any way to refute a God. That seems to be an assumption, actually, that's coming up front. Now, neither Shannon or I would walk around and say there is no God. What we would say is that we lack evidence of God. I think that the Christian God can be perhaps disproven because there are lots of claims made about it. But until you come up with a definition of God that actually has a falsification criteria, I would 100% agree with you that a thing without a falsification criteria can't be falsified. I think we would both nod our heads and say yes. But that is more in the problem with the person who comes to us with the definition of their definition of God. Yours seems to be some combination of existence and consciousness, neither of which has a falsification criteria. Do you understand what I mean by falsification criteria?
Oh, yeah, I can definitely agree with that answer. I think that's a good answer. The other thing I wanted to ask you that you mentioned before, you said you had a problem with the age of the earth. And what problem?
My problems were with the belief that the earth is less than 10,000 years old that I used to hold. There are many, many, many lines of evidence that I now understand that converge to tell us that that is a ridiculous notion, or at least a non-provable notion, with a ton of evidence against it, starting with radiometric dating and going to virtually every dating method that we have, even including we have calendars that are older than that. So, but the fact that, I know that a lot of Christians hold that the earth is old, that the earth is 4.3 billion years old, and they have no problem with that. And that's great. That's a different line of Christianity than what I was. I gave that an example at the top of the show, only a thing that got me started questioning.
Yeah, people seem to get hooked up on that, though. That's something, I don't know if it frustrates you, Paul, but it kind of frustrates me. People hear that you were a young earth creationist, and they assume that once you stopped being a young earth creationist, that was essentially the linchpin, everything unraveled, and you didn't look any further. You just were like, well, this isn't true, and then I give up. When in fact you delved deeper, and it wasn't until you came to the end of that journey, which involved delving deep into theology and history, that you finally were able to cast it aside. So I don't want you, in this conversation specifically, when you were discussing consciousness, to get caught up on the minutia of things that people can misinterpret from the Bible, because what I'm hooked up on here in this conversation is you've said that God is existence and God is consciousness, but is also somehow also specifically the God of the Christian Bible. And it seems to me you're saying something like anybody who had an issue it was a result of misinterpretation, which would lead me to believe that you feel as though you have the one correct interpretation. And the issue to like right there, that's a problem to me. The fact that there are so many multiple and varied interpretations seems like a problem if it's something that's supposed to be very clearly and well defined, so that we can all believe in it. It shouldn't require a personal experience. It should be like very clearly and well defined. It shouldn't be like, well, this guy has the interpretation and other people who interpret it differently, obviously they're wrong and that's the issue. But when I asked you about the consciousness and the conscious ties, you went to the Bible to speak about misinterpretations, but you didn't really give me a reason to understand what the tie is, which is what I was interested in, because it seems that you have some sort of like deism maybe that just has like a Christian flavor. Like you're defining God as existence and consciousness, but it's also the Christian God, because I've been able, through my perception that these are the two things that God is, to find ways to interpret the Bible so that I can say that it's this God, but it's not a solid enough tie that it could even come close to getting me there. And I feel like we've been all the way across the board with no clear, definitive connection. Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know if I would say I'm not a studied as scholar or anyone, but I've taken language courses and some literature courses, and I feel there is a clear meaning. Hebrew isn't a dead language. It isn't something you can't understand. What you do have to understand is the concept, though, because the concept is part of how they're interpreting the language. For example, with Genesis, when you have the 6 days in Genesis, Genesis is a poem. It's not an analytical or it's not an index or glossary of information. It's metaphors and everything like that. So in Paul, when he says the day of the Lord is like 1,000 years, most scribes agree that's an exaggeration. It just means that there's a lot of them. So the 7 days in Genesis are seven, better translated as 7 ages of creation.
But we're back to young earth creationism, though. And I'm still trying to clearly figure out how you get existence and consciousness as your definition of God tied to the Bible. I understand that there might be misinterpretations of young earth creationism that make it flawed. Sure, whatever, great, whatever, fine. But how do I get from your definition to Bible and Christian God?
I gotcha. Yes. When God said "I am" to Moses, there's generally I'll go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's 3 translations there: that I am who I am, or I am what I am. And most denominations, from my understanding, pick the latter two, because the first one is only interpreted as being pantheistic. But he said "I am" twice to Moses right there, and if you pick the second translation, it comes down to only "I am." So contextually, it seems that "I am" is the proper translation. When you go through the Bible, you see they equate God to truth, so they're really synonymous. And what's truth but existence? They just believe that existence is aware. They call God love. All knowledge comes from God. All our knowledge comes from existence. It just seems to be very coherent with the Bible.
Okay, but the internal coherence of the Bible, it doesn't speak to the truth of a God. It speaks to the internal coherence of the Bible.
Right. Yeah. I'm still not pulling out the connection. I am going to have to let you go soon, Daniel, because we've been talking for a little while, and there's a bunch of other callers in the queue. I'm not even sure we're going to be able to get to all of them.
And is Daniel, is the thing you wanted to call about this disproving of God? Because I hope you're not getting the impression at any point that Shannon and I, or most atheists, have ever tried to disprove God. That's not a thing that's happening. We are unconvinced of gods. And you referenced that it was because of a faulty definition. And as I said, until someone comes with a definition that has falsification criteria, we're going to nod our heads all day long and that's a definition that you can't falsify, and we'll just all shrug our shoulders and our lives will be unaffected.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of misinformation about the Bible, and misinformation is the best way, to hide information. So I would say that's the first problem most people have.
Mm-hmm.
And you understand that for every Christian who believes X, you can find Christians who believe not X. So I guess Shannon and I would love for the Christian group to get their story straight. And they can come let us know let the Christians decide. Yeah, come tell us what you decided.
Another one of those councils. All right, Daniel, I do have to let you go, Daniel. I want to say thank you for calling.
Can I share one more thing with Paul?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And then I do have to let you go, though, because there's other people waiting. Go ahead.
I wanted to share something about radiometric dating most people don't know. Most people know about the rate of decay, it's good science. Most people know that when lava cools, it relatively has the same amount of materials in it, which is where we have a starting point. When we age it, that's how we get a number. But most people don't realize that lava is radioactive. And so you have a radioactive material which includes aging, it implies aging, that cools, always relatively has the same amount of those radioactive elements. So you got an aging material that cools down and acts like it's never aged before. And that's still an unknown. We have no idea why that is.
Sure, so, Daniel. And do you know what? Point that out. Okay. So your homework for next time is to go look up whether that is a surprise to people who do radiometric dating on a regular basis, whether igneous rocks have radioactive clues, and what they have to say about it. Like, what is, if this is not news to them, I would love for you to tell me what the opposite to the position you just gave me was. But next time.
Oh, well, okay, sorry, go ahead.
All right, we will let you go, Daniel. Thank you very much. So our next caller is going to be Jill from Michigan, who is a theist. And the question looks to be how to raise children. Hi, Jill. Welcome to the line. Can you hear us?
Oh, dear God. Hi.
Hi, Jill. That was one of the best hellos we've gotten. Uh-oh. Oh, crap. It's my turn. Hi, Jill. How you doing?
Terrified. I don't usually do this kind of stuff, but I live in a tiny Christian town, and I have no one else to ask.
Okay.
Sure.
So my family was super atheist growing up. I choose religion because I had a daughter who passed, and I had to have an abortion a few years ago due to risk of kidney failure. So I choose religion because it gives me happy places to imagine my kids being. But I have an 8-year-old son, and I want him to know, like, we teach him about different religions and different cultures. We include religion in our daily life. He sees me praying and stuff like that. But I want him to also know that he doesn't have to believe in God. And I'm in this weird place where I don't know how to. I don't know how to express this to him in a way that makes sense, and that, I don't want to force religion on him. I don't want him to feel like he's being spoon-fed something. We don't really go to church because a lot of the churches in our area are insanely evangelical, and dear God, no. I want him to have a well-rounded, I want him to understand the world and see religion, if he chooses it, in a way that makes him feel like a better person, and, if that's something he chooses. But does this make any sense?
Yes, it makes complete sense to me. I have a 9-year-old boy myself. Paul has 3 children. And yeah. So, yeah, and our children are in different circumstances. His children are theists, and I am raising a neutral. So did you want to go first, Paul, or did you want me to go? Because I have lots to say about this.
This is all you.
Okay. So one of the main things that I say, if you watch the channel, if you watch my channel or me elsewhere, whenever I'm talking about this particular subject, I am raising my child to teach him.
Mr. Atheist,
Oh, do you?
So I have no idea who you are.
Oh, okay. I'm Shannon Q. Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Hi. So, hi. So one of the things that I say quite frequently is that I am raising my child to teach him how to think, not what to think. And whatever decisions he comes to will belong to him and not me. So as a result, he knows that I am an atheist, but he also knows, and this is one of the most important things I think I've done as a parent, that he can believe whatever he chooses and be accepted by me without question. But I would like the opportunity to talk with him about it. I want him to be able to feel like he's open, that he's accepted, that I'm not attempting to change his mind. And I think the same goes if you're trying to raise a neutral as a theist, like as somebody who is a theist. What you need to do is create a space where that the child is able and has. Sorry?
But he feels comfortable to say whatever he feels that he needs to say.
Right, whatever he comes to. So, for example, my son came to me not that long ago and said, Mom, I think I believe in God. And I said, okay, buddy, why do you think that? And he said, I don't know, really. I just feel like some people are happy when they do. I said, do you think that's a good reason to believe something is true because it makes you feel happy? And he said, I'm not sure. I'm going to have to think about that. And I said, okay, buddy, why don't you just think about that then? And if you want to talk to me about it again, you can come back and we'll talk about it again. It's really good for you to take some time and think about these things for yourself. He came back to me and he said, no, Mom, I did think about it. And there are so many stars in the sky. And I don't think that anybody could create all of them and be everywhere all at once because nobody could be in that much space. I said, well, if there is a God, do you think he could be everywhere? Because he's God. And he said, yeah, maybe, Mom. I'm going to go back and I'm going to think about that. What I was encouraging him to do is to not adopt my perspective, but to figure out how to get to his own perspective. And it's difficult to resist the urge to answer the questions. To answer the questions, it's very, very, very difficult to resist the urge to say, I have the answer. This is the way I got the answer. Maybe you can be like me and get the answer the way that I did, but you don't want to teach your child to think like you. You want to teach your child how to think. They need to be able to have the freedom to learn how they come to their decisions, why they come to their decisions, when they're good and when they're bad. And the way that works is taking an epistemological approach, asking them how do they come to the decisions, encouraging them to think about why they came to those decisions, and giving them room to do it. You don't want to risk indoctrinating a child one way or the other. I don't want my son to become an atheist because Mom's an atheist any more than anybody should want their child to become a Christian because they're a Christian, or insert any other belief structure here. You want your child to learn how to think for themselves. The hardest thing you'll ever do as a parent is teach your child not to need you. And that's what an approach like this, I think, does. My job as a mom is to teach my son to not need me for anything, to be entirely independent, to be able to function on his own, and for me to have the presence of mind and emotional, as hard as it is, the emotional certainty that, when he endeavors out onto his own, he's equipped for that. He doesn't require me for answers because I taught him how to find them. So I think that if you do that, they'll come to their own decisions. And they'll be good decisions. Those conclusions will be valid because you taught them how to get there, not where they should get.
And Jill, you didn't mention how old
this is kind of how my dad. Sorry.
All I was going to say was you didn't mention how old your child was, and that's fine. You don't need to tell us. But in my case, I was a Christian and I went too far. I actually spent many more years telling my kids what to think than how to think. And so all I wanted to relay was, if you are now in a position where doing this with the religious conversations is going to be too tricky because of things that have already happened or already been said. Start with non-religious claims. When you see a commercial on TV, you can say to your kids, and this is what I do with my kids now.
Good.
Oh, do we suppose that claim in that commercial is true? How might we check to see if that is true? Why are they saying so?
Yeah.
You can start this how to think thing. If religion is uncomfortable, it doesn't have to all be about religion, because of course it applies to in social media. It's everything we're seeing on a screen.
We already do a lot of that stuff, pointing out the flaws in social media and commercials. Oh God.
So then make sure that you're not putting religion into some category that's an other. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jill. Sorry, we've said a lot.
What you guys are talking about. What you guys are talking about are some of the ways that I was raised. With atheist parents who wanted me to develop my own faith. I mean, they were slightly abusive, so some of it was more, especially from my mom, was more a bit twisted. But from the very onset with my son, I think I've been pretty neutral, but I still want to make sure, especially because I know my parents meant well, but they didn't always come off. I had this little phrase that I was supposed to say when people asked me what religion I was. It's just like, religion is the thumb with which society is crushed on, or something like that. So I don't, at the same time, I want to encourage these positive discussions, like you were saying, what do you think? How would you get there? I love that. I like these ideas. And what you were saying too about it doesn't always have to be about religion. It doesn't always have to be, but just encouraging these open thought conversations that encourage, open discussion. I think that's a great place to start regardless. And it also, great bonding, great family discussions too. And that was a good part of my childhood. So this helps.
Jill, sounds like you're a pretty good mom.
I'm going to go check out your channel.
Oh, thanks. Oh, it's garbage. It's trash. I wouldn't bother. Check out Paul's channel. He's way better than mine.
Oh my God.
I appreciate your call, Jill. Hopefully you found something helpful in there. And I'm Shan with 2 N's _Q0 on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, find me and let me know how it goes. Let me know, if you need a. I'm in the parenting a boy about the same age, so I'm in the same boat. I don't want him to be an atheist because I'm an atheist. I want him to be him and be the best version of that.
Yeah, I started watching Mr. Atheist because I wanted some kind of other opinion. I wanted to make sure that I was doing right by my son, and found out I just loved his channel. I loved his perspective, and that's how I ended up finding this discussion tonight. So I'm going to go find your channel and let you guys get back to the other callers. I really appreciate your advice tonight. Thank you.
No, not a problem, Jill. Thank you for calling. We are going to let you go. I appreciate it. Good luck.
Absolutely.
All right.
Have a good night.
You too. All right. So we have an atheist next. This is our first atheist of the evening. That almost never happens. You attract the theist there, Paul. This is Emery from Virginia, and has a question about how to separate religion from government, I think. Hi, Emery. Welcome to the line. How are you this evening?
Hello, ma'am.
Oh,
Yes.
I got ma'amed. Ow! Ow, Emery, that hurt. That hurt. Physically hurt me.
I'm terribly sorry. I only discovered you about a month ago.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Well, now you know my position on ma'am.
It just comes from when I was in the military.
Oh, I appreciate the respect.
Anyway.
I was just joking. Go ahead, Emery.
So, yes, it seems to me that the main power of the religious right in America comes from money, not so much numbers. How much do you agree or disagree with that statement?
Hands up if you're Canadian. Paul.
So
we're Canadian.
That doesn't mean we don't have thoughts on America. Yeah.
Paul also lived in the States for a long time. Yeah, that's fair enough. You go. This is a you question.
Well, I mean, how much is it? You're asking an unknowable question. Certainly, what I will say is,
Indeed, that
obviously,
actually.
the last number of elections have. If you looked at so if you look at popular vote in America, obviously, the current government wouldn't get in if it became a popular vote system. Of course, it's equally true in all countries that the government that gets in has very little incentive to change the system by which they got in. And then if you look at the states, of course, the way districts work and the way the delegates work, and it's there's some disproportion for some geographical areas over others. So it doesn't matter, for example, if a Republican or a Democrat was to get 99% of the vote in New York and California. It makes zero difference, right? Whether 51 or 99 makes not much difference over the country. So, so in a way, what you say has some merit, that it's not entirely about numbers, because if it were, you'd have come up with a different system. But I think a lot of good arguments can be made that purely popular vote doesn't necessarily represent regional interests well, and that can be a problem too. So, what are you thinking?
So
does that make sense? Does that align with what you're thinking?
Right. That actually does segue nicely into what I was thinking, because we know that super PACs are a real problem. That basically people can give unlimited donations to these secret organizations that crank out, which you could argue would be propaganda for this candidate or that candidate. And it is well known that the religious right has been involved in this quite heavily at times. It's black money. We have no idea where it comes from, and only limited understanding of where it goes.
Transparency is definitely a problem, for sure. I think I do kind of feel like, though, that the Republican Party, in particular, I do think they embrace religion less because religion has money, and because otherwise they might, be more interested in Catholics who have more money than evangelicals, for example. But I think they do want the numbers. I think when Donald Trump decides to support a right-wing position that isn't necessarily consistent with the way he lives, I do think he's doing that for votes. And I think the Democratic side does the same thing. I don't believe for a second that Hillary Clinton is a Christian in a way most people would recognize Christianity, but she also espoused Christianity and went to church on Sunday. I think that's just a demographic block. I kind of feel like it's the numbers that they want, less the money of the churches. But that's a Canadian just saying random stuff. So I don't know, Shannon, where you want to go from there.
Okay.
Go ahead, Emery. Go ahead.
So the other big issue in America is gerrymandering, where political parties set districts after the census. We just had a census in the U.S., so there's going to be some rework in the districts in the next year or two. And so that's going to be, and of course whatever party happens to be in charge of the state sets up the districts so that they'll remain so. It's a really thorny issue of how exactly you prevent this, but when you figure Congress has got less than 25% approval rate, and they've got about a 90% re-election rate, something's clearly off.
But I think you would agree, I think what you just said was correct, that both parties, from an outside perspective, both parties seem to take advantage of the system when in the states where it's advantageous to them. Like, I don't think this is a one-party problem, these weirdly shaped districts.
No,
I also don't feel like
clearly
that's, and of course that's not a religious. It's not necessarily a religious problem either, right? It's part of the republic system the states has adopted. And I don't think it's necessarily flawed at the core, but I do think, as an outsider, the district shapes, for example, is a strange thing to us. So, but unless this ties more to religion, Shannon, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm not sure what I have to offer, really.
Since you're Canadian.
Go ahead, Emery. Yes, we are.
Yes, So, how do you feel about? Do you think that Canada should become a republic?
I don't have an opinion on that, right? I don't even know what that would mean, to be honest. I'm not that politically savvy. What do you think, Paul?
No, I think that our system is wonderful in that at any given federal election, there are 4 to 6 different parties that are vying that are vying to make actual change. Right. And so to slip into a system that is going to enforce a pure two-party system, I'm not in favor of. I think the checks and balances of what we have going
actually
is far better. Because
that is in the
go ahead.
Right. I wish we had more parties here too, but actually that is different. In the context of the Commonwealth, what republic means is those who want a republic want to believe that their head of state should be a citizen of their country living on their soil. As you probably already know, Queen Elizabeth is currently recognized as the head of state of Canada.
Oh, in name alone.
Well,
the Governor General. Yeah. Go ahead, Paul. But then we do have to let you go because there are other callers waiting. There's some theists on the line.
All I was going to say is we're part of the Commonwealth only in the way that we acknowledge that historically. Not that there's literally no power. We had our Independence Day by having our premier sign a piece of paper. Yeah.
All right, Emery, we are going to let you go. I appreciate your call. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your evening.
Very well.
And see you later.
Maybe
Thank
I can
you very
email
much,
you
Emery.
some
Thanks for calling.
information.
Yeah,
Sounds
for sure. Absolutely. My email's available, as is Paul's. Have a good night. All right, we're going to talk to Laura. Laura is from North Carolina, and Laura is a theist. And Laura, I'm hoping Laura is the Laura that I hope Laura is. Hello, Laura. Welcome to the line.
Hi.
Are you my best friend? Yes.
Hi, Laura Robinson. Hello, sweetheart. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so pumped that you called. Laura's a theist.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
She's super smart.
I am a theist. Yeah.
What's your question on the line this evening, Laura?
Sorry?
What's your question for us on the line this evening? You had a wild what?
Yeah, I just got a wild hair to call in. I don't know if this might not be a great question, but I was wondering if I could just point out something that I think I'm noticing with a lot of the theist callers. And this is something that's really standing out to me. I think a lot of times the way people are trying to treat religion in conversation with your show is that it's a proposition that people are arguing for. And I think that's just a misunderstanding of how religion works. And of course, I've got my religious studies teacher brain going here. And I wonder if it actually makes more sense to think about it in terms of it being an interpretive tool, right? So the thing that made me think of this was like the idea that there's no visible evidence in the world for God being involved with creation, and I think that's a really interesting claim in light of the fact that I think like a pantheist or even a theist would say that just most things happening in the world are evidence of God doing things. To me, it looks a little bit more like it's sort of just like a lens that people are looking at the world with. And I wonder if that's why there's a lot of people talking past each other here. And that's all I've got, and I just called in because I'm insane, and I thought it'd be fun to just tell you that.
Paul, you want to go for I don't think you've talked to Laura before, have you, Paul?
I've not. Hi, Laura.
Oh, you have. Hi, Paul. This is exciting. Okay, you go first. I get to talk to Laura all the time.
Well, I don't even know where to go with that other than to say, like, obviously, Laura, you heard the earlier callers who were telling us that we were interpreting Christianity wrong. And if I'm not mistaken, you've had a couple of people in your life telling you that you've interpreted Christianity wrong. So,
for sure.
300 today.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing.
So, in one way, I kind of want to give the same answer as my previous caller. It's like, well, maybe you Christians can all sort this out and come let us know, when you got it figured out. It's not really up to atheists for Christians to solidify what they mean, what they're saying.
Yeah.
Shannon,
I have kind of it. Yeah. Okay. So I'm excited because you and I only ever really talk about Bible history. So this is fun for me.
Yeah.
So when you say it's an interpretive lens.
I've had a beer, so I'm not at my best.
Nice. One day we're going to have a beer together, you and I. I don't drink beer. I'll have rum. You can have a beer.
All right.
So when you say interpretive lens, what I'm hearing is that this is just a way to interpret perceptual input that makes sense to someone. Like it's Go ahead and elaborate because I want to make sure I'm on the right track.
Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with the audio. But I think I think that actually might be a more helpful way to think about it. That a lot of times what's happening when you're talking about a Christian interacting with the world and saying, saying that they're having these experiences of God, a lot of times it's not really that they have started these baseline conclusions. They've argued their way to some kind of like major theistic proposition. It's that, people are saying that, well, I prayed for this and that either this did or did not happen, but either way, it was because of the sovereignty of God. It's more of how you just respond to the world. And I think that's why a lot of times when you get into these less modernist, less propositional ways of interacting with religion, they're basically unfalsifiable or falsifiable, right? Like they're just completely outside of the proof system. And I think that might be what's happening there. And I think that's kind of how I experience religion, so I might be projecting, but...
Yeah, so the thing is, though, like when people call in to talk to people like me or Paul, essentially what they're doing is attempting, or from my perspective anyway, what it seems like to me, what they're doing is attempting to assert that their position is true, and they can prove it. But the problem comes in when you if you look at religion as a set of perceptual experiences that is viewed through a specific lens, then I mean, fine, right? But the problem is that I can't share that with you. I can't experience what you're experiencing. So you can impart to me all day, every day, that it feels like this to me and it feels real. And I can even grant you that it feels like that to you and it feels real. But that could never get me or anybody else there. And what people are trying to do is trying to say, I got there because, it's more than a feeling. It's more than a perceptual input. It's this and this and this. It's X, Y, and Z. It's this proof and that proof, and it's this history, and it's this science, and it's this philosophy, and that's why I'm right and you're wrong. And that's the way a lot of people, I think, approach these dialogues. What's more interesting to me is conversations like the one that you and I are having right now, and I've had previously. We're like, okay, well, why do we differ? Where do we deviate? What does that mean when somebody else deviates? How does this interpretation cause issues? And how do people maybe harm somebody from this perceptual ideology and maybe still do harm from this perceptual ideology, and how do we counter that, and why can't we discuss it? Like, those are the types of things that are interesting to me. I'm less interested in arguing with somebody all day every day about whether there is or isn't a God, because like you said, most of it comes down to I have a personal experience. Right. Like, amen. Can we get an amen?
It's also and I'm also totally content to say that, like, if we're starting from the position that we're going to start with this evidence, this is observable evidence, and build our way to something, I'm happy to go on record saying there is no doubt that atheists have the floor on that system. Like, of course that's
You are canceled
true.
again, Laura.
But sorry?
I said you're going to get canceled again.
Shannon just announced you were canceled, yeah.
Oh, no, I know. I'm doomed. Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is what happens when I get called in the middle of cooking dinner. No, I'm totally content to say that's what happens, that atheism has the floor. But I think that the religious landscape is big enough, and this is something I really wish religious people could kind of content themselves with. The idea that the religious landscape is big enough that there is something other than evidence for propositional truths operating when we're talking about religion. And maybe, of course, my whole thing is that I think that arguing about which religion is right is a giant waste of time. But, which is the only reason anyone knows who I am. But it's
not a giant waste of time to people who want to feel as though they're intellectually accurate in their belief systems.
Right.
And that, I think, a lot of apologists specifically want to say, well, not only am I smart, I'm smarter than you, and here's the list of reasons, philosophically, whatever, theologically, historically, blah, 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 that, you haven't looked at these evidences, and clearly that's why I'm smart.
Right.
And you think you're smart, but you're not really. And I mean, there can be some of that on the atheist side too. Like, I've seen atheists say stuff and I'm like, oh God, no. Oh my God, that's wrong. Oh my goodness. So like, where the meat of it is, I think, is talking about how we act and how we interact with the world and what our belief systems lead us to do in that regard. And that's where I like to have these discussions, and why I'm invested in doing what I do is because evidently people utilize religion to hurt people, and it's difficult to have these conversations because it almost seems off limits. But when you do have these types of conversations, you're ultimately going to get into the, is it or is it not true? And if you're protecting your religion, if you're saying, well, not only do I have a right to believe it and it means something personal to me and like it's true in my heart and I've been, visited by the Holy Spirit or, whatever that looks like to you, but here's my list of evidences that it's true, and that the reason I'm acting this way is because I'm supporting this religion and the tenets of this religion for X, Y, and Z reasons, thus I'm justified in my actions. And that's where I go, breaks. We need to have a better conversation about whether this is or isn't true first, and what you're doing and why, and how we can ground it in reality. Like, if everybody was like you, I probably wouldn't be on the goddamn internet, Laura.
But here's where I differ, guys.
This is like my approach to this is that I actually think at its best, religious people and non-religious people can have a lot of common causes. Because I think there are a lot of people in the Christian community who I think have seen a lot of the stuff that you have seen, Shannon, with Christian counseling. And there are a lot of people in the Christian movement who are trying to fight that. And I think where you get these strongholds is they're defending something that's a lot bigger than sort of a generalized confession of Christian faith. It's Christianity and all these often highly organized, highly money-making enterprises like Christian nationalism and so forth. And I guess like if I could pick like a next frontier of religious organizing, it would be more interreligious allyship like this, right? Because I actually think a lot of us have very common causes, especially those of us who tend more left on social issues. But that's sort of my little utopian, I'm such a Libra feeling.
I'm such a Libra. Paul was going to say you differ.
I'm just being an idiot.
You're fine. So. Go ahead, Paul. You said you differ from me.
Well, so
don't disagree with
Laura,
me.
I'm very much on the side. Shannon and I don't specifically agree on this point. We live our lives differently. All I care about at this point, for the rest of my life, all I'm going to care about is it true? Not does it have utility. I don't care if it has utility. Because I think we both know you can find utility elsewhere if you want. So I guess my question for you, Lori, is you called in to give some advice to Christians, it sounds like. Do you have advice to people like me who care about the truth value first and foremost? Am I misled? Are my priorities out of whack? And or am I doing something wrong? Or could I do something differently, from your perspective as a Christian?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is I don't know if I know you well enough to say that, right? And that's not a weasel answer. It's just that that's such a complex question. I mean,
Sure,
I guess the thing that I would...
as a placeholder person.
Sorry?
And just me as a placeholder person for someone for whom they're valuing the truth value of it ahead of utility value.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm being totally honest, I feel like there isn't. So I tend to come from a theological school that's referred to as Bardianism, which is very dependent on the idea that Christianity is the the experience of believing in God is something that is given to you and it can't really be argued into. It needs to be revealed. So from that perspective, I don't tend to think that I don't really have any interest in trying to fight non-Christians into the faith. I don't think that's something I'm capable of. I guess if I had any just general advice for you, it would just be to, to fight for things that are true, to fight for things that are good, to fight for things that are just, and just see where the chips fall, right? And I think you can do a lot of wonderful work without having that experience. And I'm very open to that.
Yeah. And I feel as though people might have got the impression that Paul just gave that I maybe don't care if things are true. I do care if things are true. Yeah. That is important to me. I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
No,
but when it comes to existing in the activist realm, I'm more interested in the actual effects on humans and humanity than the truth claims, I think, play into that. So I guess I'll amend my answer slightly, because now that I've whether or not it is or isn't true matters when you're attempting to compel people to change their behavioral manifestations. Because if the reason that they're either behaving or acting poorly, or treating people poorly, or treating themselves poorly, which is a serious issue as well, is because they're in a belief system that they believe is true, that's causing deleterious effects, you need to be able to address whether or not it is or isn't true in order to even have footing. You can't just say, well, it's damaging, because if you're convinced and compelled that it's true because you've had a personal experience or rationalized yourself into it based on whatever you've been exposed to, me saying you're hurting yourself isn't going to matter, or you're hurting other people isn't going to matter. Especially the hurting other people. I've literally had theists look me square in the eyes and I'd say, you're hurting other people. And they legitimately, honestly, when it comes to the trans rights or gay rights activism, for example, that literally look me in the eyes and go, no, I am doing them a favor. I am saving them. And they believe it. They believe that they're attempting to intervene to save them from the harm that a God is going to cause them, that their God is going to cause them by hurting them now. They're preventing an eternity of torment. Yeah. So, and if they're being believed, I absolutely need to show them why that's not true. Or the person that they're hurting is going to continue to get hurt because they believe the same thing that person believes. And that belief is what's hurting them. So I need to show them why that belief isn't true. I need to unravel it in order to, for the same justification that they're giving, to protect them. And so truth matters and those sorts of things. Like somebody you're not somebody who would ever actively harm somebody, though, right? So to you, it probably is. You're probably you're probably somebody that's like me. When you see somebody hurting somebody, you're like, what is your problem? Why would you do that? How can you live with yourself? How do you wake up in the morning knowing that you're just hurting people? But people do reconcile it. They justify it to themselves because they see it as protection. And in order to address it, you need to figure out whether or not it's true. Make sense?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with all of that. I mean, the pragmatist in me is very much the progressive Christian in me is thinking, okay, if I'm talking to a person who is very anti-gay in their orientation and very anti-trans in their orientation, is doing a lot of damage, and it's specifically because of Christianity, what do I do about this? I think it can be both pragmatic and, I'm obviously extremely biased here, accurate, to try to show that person towards trans-accepting views of Christianity, because they are out there. They do exist in a lot of spaces. Instead of trying to go after the theism itself, right, or the Christianity itself. I guess that's one thing that I would really try to draw out in these conversations, is the fact that every religious tradition in the world exists in so many manifestations, and if you are really committed to something, and there are lots of people who are so committed to Christianity, and I don't think that's bad. I think it's wonderful, obviously, but I think that part of the question is, okay, are there things you are believing that are false? I completely agree with you that is it true matter. Are things that you believe that are false, or the things that you believe that are damaging, that you think necessarily derive from Christianity? And I think just when you look at the world and all the ways people have been Christians throughout history, that's pretty easily falsifiable. So that's where I would just take it. But
so I have an honest question for you. When approaching a subject like that, and I'm asking this ardently and honestly, I'm curious, why is an important aspect of removing that person from harm retaining their faith?
I mean, again, I'm coming at this from a very biased perspective because I am a Christian, and I'm never sorry when somebody is or stays a Christian.
Right.
I don't actually even know. I mean, lots of people's coming out process does involve at least a temporary stepping away from the faith, right? And I'm not necessarily mad about that, because churches can be really harmful. And I think if a person comes out and then their church rejects them and then they leave the church completely, I think that's a very understandable self-protection thing to do.
Right.
Again, I am biased because I am a Christian. I think it's wonderful when people come back to gay-accepting or trans-accepting churches. But for a lot of people, that's just not going to be something they're capable of for a while. And in those cases, I am completely understanding. I think it's a very understandable first step out. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting conversation to have, because so many times we find ourselves, or we seem to find ourselves, on polarized opposing sides of battlefields where, I need to defend the faith and I need to prove the faith is evil. But that prevents the opportunity to have nuanced conversations about, coexistence and why things aren't damaging, and how we can work together on specific issues. Like the idea, if there's a way to reconcile faith that no one is harmed as a result of holding to it, I mean, sure. If there is a faith that exists, I still wouldn't believe it was true. I wouldn't subscribe to it, but I would be less motivated to consistently be on these platforms having dialogues with people about it and conversing about whether things are or aren't true. Do you see where my motivations lie and why I think that it's valuable?
Right. I mean, I feel like it's always a little hard to talk about these things because there's both. I mean, the primary motivator for me is always the person, but I do have these. I do have these commitments that I don't ever think that. I think. Sorry, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this. I think for me, it always makes me sad when somebody leaves the faith, leaves Christianity because of some personal hurt. Because to me, it seems so unnecessary. So that's why it really makes me always really sad that, if you go to this really homophobic church and you are yourself gay and you leave the entire Christian tradition, that always makes me really sad because it just seems like such a waste, and I'm really sorry that that's the way Christianity was presented to you. so I think that's always the perspective at which I approach this. Even though I do understand why, I completely understand why some people are so hurt by their experiences that's just something they can never return to, right? And that makes sense to me, but it still makes me really sad because it seems like such a waste that there are these, wonderful queer affirming churches that would never do that to you. And I would obviously love it if, queer kids who come up through the Christian church who are queer and come out and they feel like they have to leave. I would love it if they could come back to those communities and just find that sort of healing and restoration to the traditions that they were raised in. But that can't happen for everyone, and maybe it shouldn't happen for everyone. So that's,
Right.
Yeah.
And it extends further than that too. Like, that's why these conversations I think are super important, because there's cultural prevalence and influence. There's things like Christian counseling. There's, legislate, like all religious influence permeates so many aspects effortlessly of culture and society, and seems to have immunity from, yes, exactly. And it seems to have some sort of immunity from criticism. And
I think I lost you.
I think
Shannon?
We've lost Shannon. All right.
Shannon?
All right. Yeah. Well, so Laura, so in terms of trying to wrap up, if there's a coherent thought in all this stuff, that sounds to me like something that needs to be worked on from the Christian side, right? Like I can't imagine a Christian is going to take from me, hey, you're interpreting this part of Romans wrong, and Paul never meant gay people. Like, that's not something that can come from, I think, an outsider. Would you agree with that?
Right. Totally agree.
So, given that, you see, your advice that you were calling in today was largely advice to Christians. Is that fair?
Yeah, basically was really, or just, if I could just sort of throw this out into the general, world of the internet, that maybe it might make more sense to think about religion this way, and for Christians to sort of claim this, or just, religious people in general to claim this is a way that we are engaging with the world, and that might lead to more productive conversations and, more self-reflection about how these things are operating for us. So
I agree, completely agree. And so, and as Shannon said, if where Christians and atheists and polytheists and any religion can find common ground, I think we should do so, because we all know we exist in this world. So if we can make this world better, whether there's another one afterwards or not, I think we should opt for that. Well, thanks, Laura.
Great causes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh my gosh, thanks for taking my call, y'all. So have a wonderful evening. I hope you get Shannon back on the line. And you guys stay safe and healthy, okay? And
the next movie recommendation I'm waiting for.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Sounds great. Have a good night.
Sounds good. Night, Laura. So I know Shannon had. We have one last caller. Well, Shannon had she had a hard stop that ended right now. So I think what we will do is let's take the last caller. Let's do it quick. So we have, is it Sven on the line? Are you there, Sven? No, well, that makes it easy.
Yeah, are you able to hear me? It is Sven.
Oh, hi, Sven. I hear you.
Hi.
We lost Shannon briefly,
I had it on mute while I was listening to the show.
Sounds good. We lost Shannon briefly, but I'm still here. What can I help you with tonight? What can we talk about?
Okay, so did you see the question? We can either talk about that or the last caller kind of. I guess when I left.
Well, I know that
Christianity,
I'm glad Shannon's back because. Go ahead.
I can't hear.
I think it's solution for Christianity. A big help would be to let go of the belief in Yahweh and make that like totally just a tale, or get rid of the tyrant part of it and see a good new way for Christianity. The philosophies of Jesus aren't so bad. We could talk about that or the question.
Well, I'm more interested in...
Your specialty is apologetics.
I'm actually... Videos. Yeah, no, but I would love to talk about the soul, and I know Shannon would as well if she can hear us. I don't know if Dave can...
I'll just mute myself and sit here. Nod.
But if we can talk about the soul, let's go with that.
That would be awesome. So, are both of you, or it sounds like Shannon's back, but do you believe in an afterlife, or that the soul is separate from biology at all?
I don't. I'm unconvinced of basically any theory that flows out of substance dualism or dualism or however you want to. I don't. I'm currently a methodological naturalist, and I don't see any problems that require non-physical solutions, even though we don't know what those physical solutions are yet. Does that sort of answer your question?
It does.
That's my position at this point.
And I can understand that. There is no way to prove or disprove the soul, but it is compelling for a lot of people, and I guess especially as an empath, and like the last caller was a Libra, as am I. So trying to see the balance in things and seems the soul, and as we know, we are. I think it gives a lot of hope to people to know that there are connections with people and that there's an afterlife. And we see people connect in archetypes, and that seems to like create communities and balance. And I think there's more to that than biology.
And archetypes, you know, I come at this from with the Star Wars franchise for quite a while. So, you know, Joseph Campbell and his, you know, archetypal studies, you know, is something I'm definitely familiar with, and we see over and over again. I guess the question back to you would be, is there anything about archetypes that wouldn't have equal explanatory power, given that consciousness is a property of the physical brain? Is there anything that would change about archetypes if that happened to be... If we find a material solution to consciousness, do you think that changes anything about archetypes?
I guess it would, but then again, like I said, it is a kind of impossible thing to prove or not prove, and I know the burden of proof is on the claim that there is a soul, but yeah, just with that, then doesn't that kind of, with your desire to know the truth and run on the truth, would you be a gender abolitionist? Would you want to get rid of all concepts of like social structure because they're not really true?
So when it comes, well, certainly social structures, certain social structures have utility, and so and they exist only because they have social utility, not because we know they're true. So, for example, our monetary system is entirely fictitious per se. A piece of paper or the coin in metal in a coin isn't different than other metal. We know that we are ascribing it value for the general utility of society, right? So no, I wouldn't want to abolish. Are you back, Shan? No.
I'm here, yes.
I wouldn't want to abolish all social structure, just, you know, for that reason, because obviously parts of it are true. So I believe that empathy is a very important part of all social species. Social species demonstrate empathy, and so that has a lot of utility in keeping us alive longer and stronger, for example. Does that answer that part of your question?
Yeah. It does. I just do think there is utility in belief in gods or a god, and that, you know, I believe it should be fluid. I am basically with an atheist, is that just means a claim that no God has been proven or stated correct to know what it is, because we can't understand like chaos like the creator. It's obviously so far out of touch. If it could do anything, it would be curing all kinds of wickedness we see around the world. But I think it drives a lot of people to want to stop, you know, bad things from happening. And how do we really?
But I think you and I would agree
what bad is and good is if there's no. Go ahead.
bad and good are really just the labels that we put on. Good are the things that we label closest to what our preferences are, and bad is the label we give to things that are the furthest from the things we want. So really, I don't believe that right or wrong or good or evil are nouns. They're descriptors, right? But let's. I shouldn't have sidetracked there. We were talking about whether something whether it has something utility. I think you and I would both agree things can have utility but not be true. You'd agree with that, right?
Correct, like gender.
Sure. Well,
I'm non-binary.
Gender, for example.
In the capital Wars. Go ahead.
Gender, I defer to experts in these fields, and I think that there's a lot to learn, and I believe that part of what we assign to gender is obviously a social construct. Part of it's biology. Where those lines are, I'm not going to touch that. That's not my area of expertise, and I leave that to others. But I think just given it seems like you're advocating for the soul is that there is possible utility, and my question is it unique utility? Is there something unique about the utility that belief in the soul gives that can't be found elsewhere?
I do believe so, I guess, because I come from the perspective that if there's no changing the world for the better, or making things morally, finding a good side, I don't really, I guess that would lead me towards antinatalism. I don't believe we should subject people to the cruelties of this world if there's no really
but do you think
correcting goodness and wickedness.
Right, but that's not a utility that requires a soul, right? Like I can have, as I said, I can have empathy with people merely because I can put myself in their shoes and understand that I don't want to be hit in the head, therefore I shouldn't hit other people in the head. I don't need a soul concept to arrive at the same conclusion about hitting someone in the head, right?
Correct. I guess in general, I don't want to give too much time because I know it's kind of off the topic of the show, but would you be more open to people having beliefs and religions that are fluid, like say even Christianity, just following the philosophies of Christ, if one day a denomination completely let go of like Yahweh? Would you be more open to people having those religious beliefs just for the goodness it gives them in their life, the utility?
Well, me personally, I really care only if I don't care about the utility, frankly. The utility to me, I would rather someone believes in something that aligns closer with my preferences. I think we all do. The closer something aligns with my preferences, the more we're going to like it. But I actually don't think that the words of Jesus are known, A, and B, that they are all necessarily good. Jesus wanted to have mother stand against husband and children stand against their parents. He came to bring a sword. Like, it's not all peace and love if we were to take the red letters in the normal New Testament, for example. You'd still have to pick and choose. And the Beatitudes, for example, are not great advice for everyone. Being constantly meek is not the best way necessarily to move forward in all cases. So again, I think you'd just be being a cafeteria Christian even if you only took the Jesus words and read. Would you agree with that?
Yes. I guess I'm definitely not here to defend Protestantism or Catholicism. I left that a long time ago.
Right.
I just do,
So I guess
like the previous caller, progressive Christianity, I see it as it could be a positive thing that they're fighting the good fight.
So for me, where it seems like we're all of us, so you and Laura and myself and Shannon, there are certain core goals that we have, and if those goals are to improve society, to improve the world, and if we can agree on what those improvements are, then it's really about coming to the best goals. and agreeing on that, as opposed to agreeing upon the mechanisms necessarily. Because if we agree that everyone should be treated with dignity, or if we agree that that pleasure is preferable to pain, and that prosperity is better to non-prosperity, if we can agree with those basic goals, then we actually don't need a religious system to test what behaviors get us to those goals. Would you agree with that?
I completely would, and that's why I do believe, humanitarianism should be at the center of any religion that's going to survive the technology era. But, the golden rule has been in most major religions, and I think it does drive a lot of people to be good when there's so much bad that's apparent in the world that people don't pay any attention to, Well, it's like people could feed all the homeless, empathy, and right? No one says anything about it or does anything about it. It's confusing.
All right, Sven. Well, I appreciate that call. I think that we can agree that where we share goals, we can share opportunity to work, and that we should do so where we can. Thanks for calling, Sven. Have a great night.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. You as well.
Thanks so much. And for everyone who's listening, if you stuck it out this far, thank you so much for putting up with me without Shannon, because obviously she's the better half of everything, frankly. But thank you so much for watching. Thanks to Jimmy Snow for having me on, and Shannon as well. I'm not sure who's on next week for the line, but stay tuned. Same bat time, same bat channel. I think with that, we will close out the show. Good night, everyone.